This scripture was said to be written by Paul while he was imprisoned. He spoke of unity in the church of Philippi as he heard that there were several members of the church who were in disagreement over what we don't know, but these things do happen in church, don't they? Yet whatever the worry, Paul's concerned for the entire congregation, not just the two in disagreement. Paul, while in jail and uncertain of the outcome for himself, in the midst of suffering and uncertainty, shared the theme of joy emerging from his words. Paul and Jesus shared examples of courage and self-surrender, and as we go about our days, how can we be in unity? How can we be humble and be energetic in our life of salvation? Words which I will rephrase as, how can we be energetic in our life of staying connected with the source, with God, with our divinity? Let's begin with Mohandas Gandhi, who is quoted as saying, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." It's kind of a funny statement, kind of funny, but on the other hand, it's really not funny at all. He made this observation in the midst of his struggle for justice for the people in the face of occupation of his native India. Reverend Gilberto Colazo shared that we are all called to be imitators of Christ, to live in a way that allows other people to see Christ in us. What is an imitator? Well, there's a great difference between an impersonator and an imitator. Impersonators take great pains to make people believe that they are who they're not. On the other hand, imitators are clearly aware that they strive to live up to the challenge of being a reflection of the person they look up to. It's so hard to walk in the footsteps of others. Many younger siblings for years wither in the shadow of an overachieving older sibling, or it could go the other way around. The sibling who sets the standard so high that it's a constant frustration to try to be like him or her. We also look up to those people in church who we consider a spiritual giant and wonder if we will ever be as spiritual as they appear to be. At work, there's always the coworker who is in the top salesperson, who makes us wonder if we really have what it takes to live up to those high standards, no matter how hard we try. But deep down inside, many of us have the clear understanding that we will fall short of this perfect imitation. But that's okay, as ultimately Paul's admonition is not about impersonating Christ, but about adopting Christ-like attitudes in all aspects of our life. When we try to live up to God's standards on our own, we become impersonators. And that's a tall order and an unrealistic expectation on our part. And it's not really what God expects of us. So then what does it mean to be called a reflection of Christ? It's not a call to perfection, but to understand that God is doing something unique and special in each and every one of us. This is God's challenge for us to live in a manner that is countercultural. Now, when bad news reaches our ears, whether it's local, national, or international, do we respond like those who live without faith, reacting perhaps like a crazy banshee, or do we reflect Christ by our reactions to the bad news? It's not always easy, but let's hope it's the reflection of Christ. Now, I'd like to add a little aside as an addition from this morning's adult forum. You know, we're doing this book on racial justice and policies, and it is not easy. And it's not just not easy with racial justice issues and policies. There's so much going on in our world and in our lives. We need to return to the heart. Steve shared that this morning. Thank you, Steve. If we could all return to the heart and return to love, it would be a lot better. But I'm acknowledging that it's just not so easy. Many of us have accompanied a loved one through a serious illness or the death process, and then help them deal with grief and loss. Sometimes it's easier to support someone else through it rather than to deal with your own pain and loss. Would you be a reflection of Christ as you face a crisis with faith and peace, or would you give in to the ranting, raving accusations against God that we have seen so many people display? I think ranting and raving are pretty normal as you struggle through. Yet as we allow ourselves to see God at work in our lives, we allow the divine presence in. We become vulnerable when we allow people to see our struggles. We don't always have to put on a happy face and hide our sorrows. That would be an impersonator of Christ. And this opening ourselves up may be new and painful, but this may be a time to admit that you need God's presence in your life in a way that you had not known before. You may have days like Job, who sparred with God, and other days there may be a negotiation session. There might be quiet days with nothing to say, and then there are the angry days. And prayerfully and finally, we hope to come to find the Christ in our hearts with peace and acceptance. Christian living is a process that begins with our conscious decision to become those reflections of Christ in our actions and reactions to life. When Bill Garrett retired last December, he left a lot of gaps for us to fill, as well as we knew that this may be a good time for some change in our church. This time of change and reflection has been our visioning process, and next week's worship, as Rick mentioned earlier, will continue into some reflective time to discuss the vision. I do hope you are all able to join us next Sunday as we worship, we share communion and lunch, and time to dream and vision together. Now, in the interest of planting some visioning seeds for next week and beyond, and sharing service to others and faith, I'd like to share with you the story of Love in Action. It's a UCC congregation in Warminster, PA. Here's their story. In 2017, the community of faith previously called UCC Warminster had a vision of creating a community center. After they had a public Great Name the Church contest, the leadership voted to adopt the name of Love in Action United Church of Christ. In the spring of 2017, the vision and dream to create an LGBTQIA+ center culminated in the birth of Saga Community Center, which is sexuality and gender acceptance, and eventually they had a queer library also. They also established services for Spanish-speaking community members and immigrant families, including bilingual therapy, immigration law, and a produce outreach. Near the end of 2019, Pastor Josh Blakesley went on sabbatical to discern the creation of a new nonprofit that would continue their dream of hosting this community center. In early 2020, the Welcome Project PA officially became a 501c3 and includes Saga Community Center, immigration justice programs, a mental health program, and interfaith programs. Now, I don't know whether they gather for what we call traditional worship anymore, yet in looking at their calendar, they have small groups to join: a spiritual support group, an element night, which is the Chinese philosophy of water, air, fire. They have activity night, they have LGBTQIA+ night, they have sexuality support groups, interfaith groups, mindfulness groups, and parent caregiver support groups. They also have community outreach. Once a month on Saturdays, they co-host a fresh produce outreach in Warrington. And periodically, they participate in service learning projects in the greater Philadelphia area that include urban gardening, cleanup, food security, and more. I don't know about you, but I find that what they have done overwhelming and wonderful and exciting. I'm fascinated by this church's changes and the time that they took to make these changes. We can certainly get Pastor Josh in here to talk about it more if we would like. This past April, our Rick Sullivan shared with us some other ideas to inspire our church's visioning process, and with his permission that he's already granted, I'm going to share some of his message with you again. We need to ask ourselves, what is it that's going to get our passion ignited? Get the investment and action flowing to make changes. Can you imagine if United Christian became the worship center in Levittown? People praying all the time? What if we had standing room only at our worship services? with messages of change and justice. And we were a place of spiritual growth, the place to be in Levittown. Maybe we'd meet several times a week, and at each gathering we had the same crowd with the same excitement and genuine connections with one another. Or imagine if we were truly hybrid and we knew one another and we had coffee and chatted online with one another. What if we were a community center which provided housing or food for insecure folks to be the place for them to come to find what they needed? What if we were the church who provided mailboxes for the homeless? They need them for an address for applying for jobs, receiving a paycheck, for their driver's license, for tax documents. What if we had showers and clothing closets so those in need could be dressed appropriately for an interview? What if we were a food kitchen, not just once a month, but every day, where people were known, seen, and cared for? What if we were an education center that people could know what it means to be anti-racist, how to engage the Bible theologically, and how that informs our lives? What if we had lectures and guest speakers, people from Princeton, Stanford, and Yale, to come to help elevate us in an educational, academic way? What if the church became a youth center, taking the idea that, like the Rainbow Room, and make the whole building for LGBTQIA+ students from grades elementary through high school to come and have a safe place to go? They could have snacks, they could do their homework, play video games, and they can be loved and accepted for who they are. These are just some of the visions of what UCC can be. Be sure to join us next week for these exciting conversations of what the future may hold for all of us. Now, Rick shared a quote, which I believe this is the one intended. It was by Frederick Buechner, who said, "Vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need." Well, it was said that your deep gladness refers to the God-given skills that energize you and bring you joy as you use them. And the world's deep need refers to the particular needs you are enthusiastic about serving. As the enthusiasm and excitement bubbles up within us, Paul claims that it's God's energy, an energy that resides deep within each and every one of us. May we also be deep-spirited friends, loving and encouraging one another, and humbly lending a helping hand, being a great imitator of the Christ. I'd like to close with a YouTube version of the talented Kane Mason family playing Redemption. And may I remind you that redemption is the action of making someone or something better, of which Jesus' life was certainly our model. It was also said that Bob Marley would be pretty proud of this rendition of his song, Redemption.